We have been in a series called Generations where we've looked at each generation. And if you can see these phones up here, they represented the builder generation and the boomer generation, the Gen Xers I talked about last week, and the millennial generation represented by the iPhone today. And what we've said is, if you're new to this series, and we do series teaching at the fellowship, if you're new to this series, here's what I want you to know, that it is key that as we walk through this morning, that we understand that we must value every generation. That's critical. Matter of fact, we must value every generation. I want you to I've done this 3 weeks in a row. I want you to lean over to somebody with you, in front of you. Hopefully it's somebody you know, and just say, here's why this message is so important, because we value every generation. So tell them in your own words what today is about. We've had a catchphrase, all of us need each of us. And it is important as we walk through each of the generations that we do recognize the value in every single generation. And today we're going to talk specifically about the millennial generation, a generation that for some would say is disconnected from the other generations. And I do promise to be really nice to the millennial generation today, knowing that this week I probably got more emails and messages, knowing what I was going to talk about today, from people in our church saying, hey, have you seen this video? Have you seen this? Check out all this different stuff. So I wanted to share with you one of the really funny videos about the millennials. Check it out.
Amy, it says you are trained in technology. That's very good. Are you adept at Excel?
No.
PowerPoint?
No.
Publisher?
Not really.
Exactly in what area of technology are you proficient?
Snapchat, Pinterest, Instagram, Vine, Twitter. You know, the big ones.
I'm surprised you didn't say Facebook.
That's for old people, like my parents. That's funny.
Well, Amy, when you're working for me, you have to have those kind of research skills, because I'll send you things for you to comb through and get the answers and send them to me. So for that, you got to be really good at technology.
For stuff like that, no problem. I'll just ask Siri.
You'll just ask Siri?
You know, Siri tell me this, Siri find me that. We're all good at getting you the answers.
Tell Siri I want you ready to go at 8 sharp each and every morning.
I don't understand.
What don't you understand?
What you just said.
You don't understand be ready to go?
No. You said 8, right?
Yes.
8 like in the morning 8?
Yes, in the morning.
Yeah. That kind of doesn't work for me. Who gets up at 8?
I do.
I Skype with my French boyfriend in Paris until like 3 in the morning. I don't even get to Starbucks until like 10, where I order my grande chai tea latte, 3 pumps, skim milk, light water, 2% foam, extra hot, but not too hot. So if it's okay, I work best in the morning at 10:45.
Wow. Amy, I don't think we're going to be a good fit.
Why are you so negative? I can sense your hostilities, and right now I am not feeling very safe. I've been here for over 5 minutes, and the only nice thing you have said to me was nice resume, which I typed all night for this meeting with you. You've given me no guidance, no validation, no encouragement, no supervision. Is there an HR director somewhere?
HR director?
Yes, I need to speak to someone. I may have to take off today as a mental health day.
Take the day off. Amy, look at me. You don't work here.
Are you firing me?
Okay, yes.
All right, well, now listen, all of you that are millennials in here, I want you to know I love you. I think you're awesome. This is not a stereotype on you. This was just a funny video that somebody passed my way. And here, you know, the beauty of the millennial generation is they are considered the most intelligent generation in our time. Isn't that interesting? Some of you might disagree with that, but it's going to be a fun morning today, I can already tell. These are people that were born after about 1983, 84, 85 on. Typically it ends around 2000, 2001. But for sake of illustration, we're just kind of saying if you were born after 1982, 3, 4, you would be a part of the millennial generation. Their parents are either the older boomers or the younger Gen Xers, typically. And it's a generation that knows an awful lot about technology. This is a generation that has grown up with iTunes, iPods, and iPhones as part of the way that they communicate. And it's the way that they listen to music. It's typically the way they even watch videos nowadays. And most of them can remember CDs, but for the most part, they listen to music on Spotify or Pandora or some other form of media outlet. It's a generation that was shaped by people and personalities like Napoleon Dynamite and Beyonce, LeBron James and Bieber. Movies that have influenced this generation are movies like Lord of the Rings and Harry Potter. And I can tell you, and you hear millennials all around this room encouraging me today in my sermon. According to Pew Research, millennials, some really interesting statistics I wanted to give to you. They make up 53% of the market share of employees right now. You need to know that. By the way, they say that within 10 years from now, millennials will own 75% of the market share of jobs. Now, I'm encouraged by that because I think it's an awesome generation. It is a generation that does have some quirky challenges with it. At times, they think they know everything. They got a little bit of stubbornness to them. They're a generation that grew up playing youth sports where everybody got a trophy. They're a generation that if they brought home a poor report card, rather than being disciplined at home, the parents just went to the school and chewed out the teacher or the principal. Matter of fact, interesting statistic I came across, that currently universities are reporting the number one complaint for graduate students. You know what it is? A mom or a dad coming to complain about the grades of their child. Grad students. It's just interesting to me. It's a fascinating generation. They're a generation that's not had a lot of adult supervision as they've grown up, and yet they're always busy doing something. And it's a generation that on the front end, the older millennials will remember things like 911, but the younger millennials, they don't remember 911, but they've not even known life without airport security. It's just a different generation, of which we need every generation. It's a group of people that have grown up believing that they've got a voice in every situation. They're asked, where do you want to go to eat? They're asked, what do you want for dessert? They have grown up believing that they have a voice. I jotted this down to help you kind of connect the dots. Think of it this way, if it comes to corporate America kind of jobs, the boomer generation values the amount of time somebody's been employed with an employer, and that's what they believe gives someone a voice at the table, is based on how much time you've been in the company. That's the boomer generation. Gen Xers view it differently. I'm a Gen Xer. They view it a little differently. They believe that you should have a voice at the table if you have a certain level of competence. So if you can do your job, you're good at your job, you've got a voice at the table. It doesn't matter if you've been here a year or 30 years. They value competence. Millennials, though, are completely different. And you need to know this, particularly those of you that are still in the workforce. If you're working with millennials, they value relationships. And they believe that they have a voice at the table because they're there. Isn't that interesting? They showed up, they're an employee, and based on the relationship they have with their employer, they just believe, I've got a voice at the table. Now, they're some of the most creative people to ever walk this planet. But they are a group of people that desire deeply to love you and to be loved back. And they can smell it when someone doesn't love them back authentically. Isn't that interesting? Most of their decisions oftentimes are based off of social media reviews. It's just a different generation, and that's a good thing because we need each generation. And each has tremendous value. The Apostle Paul comes along, and we've looked at the Apostle Paul in 3 of our 4 weeks. We looked at Jonah last week, and the Apostle Paul comes along and does something very interesting. He speaks into a younger generation than him. Now, they weren't millennials in his day, but he speaks to a younger generation, and I want you to catch what he said in 1 Timothy chapter 4, verse number 12. He said, don't let anyone think less of you because you're young. All of the millennials in this room today, I want you to hear 1 Timothy 4:12. I want you to hide this verse in your heart. Walk away today knowing that God has a special word for you. And by the way, it's going to be applicable for every generation in the room today. But it's critical that you know, particularly you millennials in the house, don't let anyone think less of you because you're young. By the way, how many of you are teachers in the room? I know we've got a bunch of teachers. All right, 1, 2, 3, 4, 5, 6, 7, 8, 9, 10. We have 10 teachers in the house that are instructing millennials or even the next generation. And it becomes really important that all of us recognize the value in each generation. And it's interesting to me that those of us that are of older generations, and I'm putting myself in that category, older generations, we can quickly become critical of something that connects to the millennial generation. I'll give you a couple of examples. It's interesting to me that clothing styles of millennials are criticized. Oh, look at their tight, skinny jeans, or the holes in their jeans, or the hats they wear. Well, before we get too critical as an older generation, can I just remind you that every generation has had some quirky clothes styles? So, millennials in the house, this is what your granddad looked like back in the day. And before we beat up those of you that had bell bottoms too much, I don't want you to forget the 80s. When teased hair and mullets were in. Yeah, some of you still got that. Yeah, every generation's got some goofy styles to it. So millennials, be who God created you to be. Don't conform to what someone from another generation says is the appropriate attire for you. Be who God called you to be. But do it with respect. Not out of arrogance, but with a respect. Because every generation had their own clothing style. If I hear, you know what, I'm not even going to go there because I hear all kinds of comments made. And typically those comments, just so you know, when you talk about somebody on our stage in a dress style, I just want you to know where it goes. In that ear, I'm listening carefully. And it went out this year so fast, it's ridiculous. So, there you go. But every generation has some quirky things. And I want the millennials to hear, not every older person is a wise person. Now, that's not a shot at elderly people. All of us, every generation, should long for wisdom. The ability to have the knowledge according to God's word and know how to apply it is wisdom. The application of that knowledge. And so Paul tells young Timothy, I don't want you to worry. I don't want you to think less or anyone to think less of you because you're young. And he goes on to say, but be an example. And I love this verse in chapter 4 and 12. But be an example to how many believers? All believers. Be an example to all believers. So millennials, you can be an example to all generations. In what you say, in the way you live, in your love, your faith, and your purity. So regardless of what generation you come from. 1 Timothy 4:12 really becomes a standard of living for us. There's an interesting guy that's really, really famous right now. We were doing a Fellowship 55 event this past week, and I was doing some research on birthdays in the month of January, and I stumbled across this guy by the name of Alex Honnold. And I knew who he was, but I really didn't know much of his story. And Alex is considered right now probably the most famous rock climber alive. In fact, he's got his own movie called Free Solo out. I've not seen the movie, but from what I understand, it'll just keep you on the edge of your seat. If you watch and you Google him and you check out some of his YouTube videos, you'll understand what his life is like. One of the uniquenesses of Alex is recently he climbed El Capitan in Yosemite, which is about 3,000 feet above the base of the park. He climbed it with no ropes, no security, no net at the bottom, no parachute on his back. He free climbed. Matter of fact, we're going to show you a little video of his free climb. Alex is by far the most accomplished climber known right now in the rock climbing industry. The question is, for me, when I see a video like Alex doing what he does is, my question maybe goes even deeper than why. I think my question goes to when. Not if he's going to slip up, when. And I don't mean to be ugly about him. I'm glad he can do what he does. It's a crazy cool gift. But when you live life on the edge, millennials, catastrophe is one mistake away, one decision away. Every generation has got a little bit of stereotype to it. I've talked about it each week. And for the millennials, these are more than just people in footy pajamas playing video games all day. They really are a unique, special breed of people. And if we're going to reach all generations, it's going to require that we understand the millennial generation, and the millennial generation understands their purpose. So, with all of that being said, 1 Timothy chapter 4 and verse number 12. Don't let anyone think less of you because you're young, but be an example to all believers in what you say, in the way you live, in your love, your faith, and your purity. So be an example to all generations. One of the things that I love, and I have 3 millennials in my home, children of mine, not all in my house, but 3 children that are all millennials. And one of the things that's interesting, I was a youth pastor for about 20 years working with students. One of the things that I have found interesting about this millennial generation is that they don't buy into this mantra that my generation did, and that mantra was, do as I say, not as I do. I grew up, I was an athlete, I played college ball, and I grew up understanding that I would have coaches, teachers, authorities in my life that would say, listen, David, you need to do as I say, not as I do. I'm going to tell you, the millennial generation doesn't buy it. You need to know that. They want to see you live it authentically for them to want to do it. And that's really an important distinction with this next generation. Because they want to see us do before we say. Colossians 3:23. Whatever you do, work heartily as for the Lord. We read it earlier in the service today, not for men, knowing that from the Lord you'll receive the inheritance as your reward. You're serving the Lord Christ. See, I want you to remember, if you're a millennial in the room or you're watching by way of internet today and you're a millennial, that you have got purpose that can be accomplished for the Lord's will much greater than what someone from my generation can do. You have an opportunity to take the gospel to all ends of this planet in a greater way than what I can do in my generation. But you got to understand purpose. And that's why I wanted us to land on 1 Timothy chapter 4 and verse number 12. Because I think this verse can become a life verse for some of our millennials who can land the plane on this verse. Don't let anyone think less of you because you're young. But be an example to all believers in what you say. That's your speech. Making sure that your speech honors and glorifies God in all you say. Man, to do a status update on your social media account does not make you an activist. But the rest of the world gets to see or hear what you're saying when you post on social media, and I caution you. There's a time and a place to speak up. But there are also times where we need to be silent. Just because you think it doesn't mean you have to say it. So that's my caution to our millennials. We quickly throw something onto social media, we chat, or we snap it, or we tweet it, or whatever other social media outlets there are, and we think that we have supported our cause when that's really not the case. So I want to encourage you, as the Apostle Paul said, you are to be an example to all believers in the way you communicate. The speech that you have, the things you talk about, the things you chat about, the things you do in your circle of influence, be godly in your speech. But he goes on to say, and also in the life that you live, your lifestyle, that we're to be an example to all believers in the way we live. Our lifestyle is literally the context of it is, it's the conduct that we have. It's the life that we live. And some of the ways that I really appreciate the millennial generation is that they want to put their faith into action. We've not seen a generation that's as willing to go and serve on foreign soil as quite like this generation wants to. It's a generation, for all of its quirkiness at times, and by the way, every generation's got some quirkiness to it. But it's a generation that is known as the healthiest generation. In the midst of some of the poor American eating diet, it's still the healthiest generation in our time. It's the generation that is known to serve more than any other generation. Isn't that interesting? They believe, they get a cause, they believe in it, they will serve for that cause, and they will give their time. So I want you to be encouraged. If you're a part of the fellowship family, or you're checking it out, you're kicking the tires on being a part of the fellowship family, I want you to know we've got a young staff. We've got some millennials on our team. Because we believe that every generation has value, and we want to be able to reach every generation. There was a day that it dawned on me. I was in my early 30s, and I was youth pastoring at a pretty good-sized church. And we would have large groups of students come to our youth group. And Wednesday night, we would have youth night, sometimes on Thursday night, sometimes on Sunday mornings. And I can remember walking in one day to our middle school group. We did 2 middle school services. Our room wouldn't hold everybody in the first service, so we went to 2. And we were averaging about 800 middle schoolers. And I can remember walking in one day, and I had 2 kids that were in this group. And people viewed me as a dad, not as the youth pastor. My pride was damaged. Because I always felt like I was the kid connector. I was the youth pastor that was fun and crazy and could preach and all that stuff. But I realized as I watched and observed that day in our youth room, some of my youth leaders who were 20 and 21 and 22 had more influence than what I was having at that moment. And we began to make a shift in our student ministry to put some younger leaders in positions of authority to be able to reach more students than we had ever reached before. See, there comes a point for all of us as whatever generation you come from, and specifically to our millennials today, that we can't just let someone look down on us because of our youth, but we must be an example to all believers in the lifestyle that we live. May your conduct back up what you say. He also goes on, Paul does, to say, be an example to all believers in your love. Man, we can throw out the term love pretty quickly, and we can define love in a lot of different ways. Today, I just want you to know, I think love is a very powerful word, but here would be one way I might just to describe this to our younger generation. That your actions line up with the Word of God in how you love people. And that includes older people. May the love that you have for one another and for every generation be a Christ-like love. You know, there is a running mantra in this generation, and maybe even a little bit in the Gen Xers, that use phrases that say things like, I love God, but I hate the church. It's not possible. It's not possible. If you came up to me and said, you know, David, I really love you, but your wife, yeah, I can't stand her. We got a problem relationally. The church is the bride of Christ. There's no way to love God and hate the church. The two go hand in hand, bride and groom. So may our love be on display. But Paul goes on to say, but be an example to all believers in your faith. I was sharing with our team earlier this morning, 59% of millennials that have grown up in church have now walked away from the church. And I began doing some research on that, thinking about why is that happening, and part of it is because they don't buy into what you say is how I should live rather than what I do. And they've watched parents or grandparents who have lived hypocritically come to church, put on a nice tie or suit, nice dress, a nice hat, and live a different lifestyle at home. Matter of fact, in this generation, the millennial generation, it is said right now that 35% of them have an anti-church position or stance. And that's not healthy for us as Americans. We need to see a generation grow up to love the bride of Christ. It is the largest people group in American history to not attend church. So we've got some challenges. We've got some opportunities in front of us. But it's going to be critical that every generation has a love for one another and a value for one another. He goes on to say, be an example to all believers in your purity. You know, I've been senior pastoring now for several years, going on 9 years, and youth pastor for a couple of decades. And one of the things that hits, I'm a student of the church. I love the church. One of the things that's hit my generation of pastors pretty hard is there seems to be this distancing in the pulpit or the pulpit ministry from talking about a real hot issue in the millennial generation. And it's the issue of sexuality and purity. And if you've been around me or our church for any length of time, although that may be a general statement for some churches in this generation, it will not be a generational issue for us. I will not be silent on this issue. I believe that the Word of God teaches clearly about intimacy as well as purity in terms of our sexuality. Matter of fact, I believe that intimacy is an amazing gift from God to be enjoyed and celebrated in the confines of marriage. I will not be silent. I believe it is a beautiful thing when expressed between a man and a woman, and that alone. See, that's called a biblical worldview rather than a cultural worldview. So today, whatever generation you're in, but specifically our millennials, you need my generation and the boomers and the builders. You need them. Learn from us. And we need you, and we can learn from you. You're an amazing group of young people. All of us need each of us. And what Paul is telling this young man named Timothy is that every generation has value. Don't let someone look down on you because you're young. Well, Pastor, you don't understand. You know who pays the bills in the church. It ain't them young people. Okay. What's the point? Young people, well, man, those old people, they just don't have a clue. Okay, what's your point? Because if we're going to take those kinds of positions about other generations, that's not the Christ-like love that we see displayed in the Word of God. There's a value system to people. Jesus died for all. Whether you have facial hair or no facial hair. Whether you wear a dress or a pair of jeans, whether your jeans have holes or they're skinny jeans at the bottom or they're bell bottoms at the bottom. See, the desire of the fellowship is that this would be a church that would value every generation so that we could reach every generation with the good news of Jesus Christ. Well, Pastor, the music's just a little too loud. Yeah, it is loud. It is loud. Well, I don't know that I really appreciate a ball cap being worn on stage. You know, I don't appreciate if you walk in a pair of bell bottoms right now with your shirt halfway cut off either. But that was the style of the 70s. We've moved beyond that, folks. I still remember the day that the first time, I've told you the story about, I was a worship pastor and a youth pastor at a church, my first church, and I brought in a drummer. People left the church over it. They were sideways, brand new believer. Played in a rock and roll band and said, can I just start playing drums for the church? And we put him right here on stage, didn't we? I mean, he was like right here, right out front. And the first Sunday he showed up, he was in a white t-shirt with no sleeves on it, cut off. And he had this massive tattoo on the side of his arm, and we're talking 90s. He had this big chain around his neck, and people got up in the middle and walked out. And my heart broke. Come on, man. This is about reaching people with the gospel. This isn't about personal taste and preference. This is about Jesus, what can I do to love people more and love people into the kingdom? rather than turn people away from the kingdom. There's a reason millennials are walking away from the church today. There's a reason they have an anti-stance with the church today. Because the church has taken a cultural worldview rather than a biblical worldview. Something is wrong when we can't embrace generations because we're offended by a style. I've made my point. You get it. Let's do this. I want to wrap up this series this way. How many of you in the room are born before 1946, part of the builder generation? All right. Awesome. How many of you are part of that group called the boomers between 46 and 64? About the same number in the room, maybe a few more. How many of you are like me, born somewhere between about 64 and 80, 81? You're a part of the Gen Xers. I mean, we're a pretty diverse group in this room. Cool. How many of you born after 1984, 85, part of that millennial? How many of you are born after 84, 85? Will you stand? Just stand for a second. Hey, I want you to know there is hope for this world because of you. There's hope. I want you to know that. That's what I truly believe. There is hope in this world to hear the gospel because I believe you are a passionate group of people. And when you buy into the cause, you will do it. Kat, you might want to just hang around after church a little bit. Maybe there's some people in here that want to support. But this generation that's standing right now, I want you to know, man, I believe in you, and I believe there is going to be a movement of God come through your generation. Unlike we've seen in my generation. I think it's going to happen. I believe that God tells us in His Word that in the last days, there will be many that will come to Jesus. And I believe it's going to happen through your generation. I have said for years that I think my children, millennials, that generation will be the generation that will usher in the coming of Jesus Christ. We better get ready, church. Because this generation doesn't need to be looked down on because of their youth. They need to be encouraged because of their youth. And you have got to be an example to all believers in your faith, in your purity, in your love, in your speech, and in your lifestyle conduct. You have to be. Because the next generation below you needs Jesus too. And you're going to be the ones to bring it to them.